If you approach medieval London, you aren't greeted by sprawling suburbs. Instead, you hit a wall of water. The River Thames forms a massive, natural moat around a tightly packed economic fortress. Anyone traveling from southern England or crossing the Channel from the continent faces a harsh geographic reality. To get to the city's markets, you have to cross that water. This map shows the precise layout of the city. The Thames cuts directly through, isolating the dense urban center. Look along the river. There are no secondary crossings. For hundreds of years, bridging this span was too expensive. That leaves one geographic solution: London Bridge. Because it was the only crossing, every merchant, diplomat, farmer, and traveler was forced through this incredibly narrow corridor. It saw thousands of crossings every single day. State control of this crossing provided a centralized location to monitor and tax every person and commodity destined for the capital. London Bridge functioned as a mandatory checkpoint. It gave the Crown absolute spatial dominance over anyone entering the city. If you walk across London Bridge today, you see a highly utilitarian concrete structure, built purely to move traffic efficiently. But for over 300 years, the English state engineered this infrastructure for a different purpose entirely. They weaponized it. Maintaining order in early modern England required specific tools of statecraft. The Crown needed to project power continuously, even when the army was nowhere to be seen. To achieve this, they used the bridge as a display case. But the targets placed here were not standard thieves or murderers. There was a strict prerequisite. To end up on the bridge, an individual had to be classified as a traitor, a political enemy of the Crown. By placing their severed heads at this bottleneck, the state intercepted every person arriving from the south with a visceral warning long before they actually reached the city streets. The bridge merged vital civic infrastructure with post-mortem political violence. It ensured that royal authority was completely inescapable. Consider the physical experience of a traveler approaching the southern gatehouse during the 15th century. You hear the roaring tide of the river below, and you are funneled toward a dark, narrow archway. This diagram shows the layout of the medieval gatehouse. High above the primary entrance, the state mounted long wooden spikes. Because you had to pass directly underneath the structure, the narrow entry forced your line of sight upward. This upward gaze is a highly deliberate mechanical choice. Forcing a subject to look up at the destroyed, rotting faces of the state's enemies instills immediate physical submission. During periods of severe political unrest, this display scaled up significantly to match the threat level. Historical reports confirm that at times, over 30 distinct heads were mounted on the bridge simultaneously. This was a massive, collective exhibition of defeated rivals, a literal wall of dead faces. The combination of sensory inputs, the deafening water rushing through the narrow bridge arches, the stench of decay in the air, and the overwhelming visual horror compounded the psychological weight of the moment. The spatial engineering of the gatehouse ensured that basic economic participation in London required a physical act of submission beneath the Crown's power. Standard execution has a major flaw as a method of deterrence. The event is fleeting. The public gathers, the axe falls, and then it is over. To maintain authority between executions, the Crown needed persistence. But they faced a severe logistical hurdle in displaying human remains: biological decay. This flowchart illustrates the technical intervention. An untreated head rots quickly. To halt this, executioners parboiled the heads and coated them in thick tar, a chemical sealant against the damp air. This expanded the display viability from days to months. In some documented cases, these tar-preserved remains stayed structurally intact on their spikes for years. This logistical intervention changed the duration of the sentence. The state successfully extended the punishment from a single moment into a multi-year public degradation. This intense level of processing raises a question. How did the Crown determine who ended up on a spike and who merely received a standard execution? The bridge served as a taxonomy of the state's greatest existential fears. The people displayed here mapped directly to specific political threats. This matrix tracks those threat factors. The first is external military defiance, perfectly represented by the Scottish rebel leader William Wallace in 1305. A foreign military commander capable of routing English armies required a highly visible response. Mounting his head in the capital proved to the public that even the most lethal external enemies could be neutralized. The second threat vector came from within the state's own borders: internal populace insurgency. Look at the inclusion of Wat Tyler. He led the Peasants' Revolt, threatening the Crown with mass lower-class rebellion. His presence on the bridge sent a clear message to the working population. The final vector is the most abstract: ideological and legal dissent. This is why figures like Thomas More ended up on the spikes. Intellectual or religious challenges to the king's supremacy were treated with the exact same physical severity as an armed uprising. These three distinct figures, a foreign commander, a populous rebel, and a trusted statesman, demonstrate the comprehensive scope of the crown's zero-tolerance policy. The bridge functioned as a public ledger, proving unequivocally that no challenge, military, populous, or intellectual, could survive contact with royal power. This system of deterrence had an immense operational lifespan. Traitors' heads were continuously processed and displayed on London Bridge from the 14th straight through to the 17th century. So why did the state ultimately dismantle such a highly effective infrastructure of fear? The removal of the spikes followed a shift in the city's geography. By the late 17th century, London was expanding rapidly, and new bridges finally broke the Thames bottleneck. As the state's geographic monopoly dissolved, its administrative capacity grew. The Crown developed more consistent methods of domestic surveillance and legal bureaucracy that didn't rely on a single physical archway. The centralized theater of London Bridge became redundant. The state no longer needed to centralize its violence on a bridge when it could project authority through paper trails and professionalized oversight. The loud, violent physical deterrence of the medieval bridge was replaced by the quiet, pervasive reality of modern administrative authority. But while the wooden spikes and the tarred remains are gone, the underlying political mandate remains exactly the same. London Bridge stands as a historical blueprint for deterrence. It proves that the logic of statecraft, that power must publicly and ruthlessly protect itself against existential threats, is permanent.